request from Judy Fasola to address the board regarding a denied bond claim, which I would believe is not correctly categorized, because I do not believe a bond claim has been denied, because I don't think one has been filed. At least that's my understanding, and I haven't been able to obtain any evidence to the contrary. However, it's my understanding this office is being pretty adamant that it is not going to file a bond claim. And with that being the case, I do not blame her for being somewhat dismayed, because I pulled the auctioneer file for Bruce Miller, who, as everyone knows, is deceased, but had a complaint filed against him. The complainant was Brant Thompson, who happens to be the son of State Senator Francis Thompson. And I found it interesting in the file in that I found a letter dated January the 16th of 2014. I can have that letter right here, from Ms. Dow, relaying that the investigation was closed and that there would be no further action taken on the matter because they could find no evidence of auctioneer wrongdoing. Mr. Thompson, approximately 17 days later, after this letter, dated February 3rd, in which he expressed dismay at this board and said that he did not believe it was performing its obligation of protecting the public in refusing to file or to pursue this matter further. He did not agree, obviously, with the conclusion that there were no auctioneer wrongdoing. File doesn't indicate what happened after that, but I think, as we all know, a quote closed investigation was reopened. I didn't see any new evidence, nothing in the file from the period February 3rd, 2014 until the date of the hearing, and yet a hearing transpired and the board gave him all kinds of guidance about filing a bond claim. I have it all on video, which is good. I think the board should do that, and I would agree with Mr. Thompson's assessment that the board was not adequately providing its consumer protection role. During that hearing, Ms. Jacobs graciously informed him that an auctioneer was required to carry a bond of $10,000. Ms. Dow correctly informed him that he had 3 years in which to file a claim for the bond. And then after that proceeding was over and the auctioneer was found guilty of violations, despite the fact that there had been a prior letter saying the investigation was closed, the board itself filed a claim for Mr. Thompson. And I'd like to, Mr. Steele left the room, but I'd like to point out we have his videotape statement that there was no direct evidence that Brant Thompson even consigned anything to Bruce Miller. The bonding company said these alleged items that were consigned, their take on it is that they were virtually worthless. And we have that in a letter from the bonding company. Nevertheless, an agreement was reached with Mr. Thompson for a $3,500 payment from the bond. And we have Ms. Fasola, who has her agenda item. This board convened a hearing, found the auctioneer guilty of multiple violations, well, one violation that was cited. Ms. Jacobs felt adamantly there was a second, and I would tend to concur with her. But for whatever reason, this board has been very adamant and has sent her a letter saying they are not going to file a bond. So I would imagine, I didn't keep my time.
One more minute.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I didn't, so I was assuming my time was near up. So I would be equally perplexed if I were in her shoes in questioning, does she have to be the daughter of a state senator to get her bond? Well, you sure yours, but all I know is an investigation was closed and it mysteriously got reopened, and the board bent over backwards to say, oh, there's this bond, you can get coverage. It's good for 3 years after you've had incurred your loss. The investigator says we don't even have any proof he consigned anything. And there's some other interesting material in that investigator's report that I won't go into, but the bond claim has been filed. So I think it's a fair question of whether or not relationships play a role in how you're treated by this board. And I think that should pretty well wrap up my time. So I do appreciate your indulgence, and that'll do it for me.
Thank you very Yes, ma'am.
Reverend Phillips.
Good morning to all. I also have some concerns, and I've always expressed concerns in reference to what Mr. Burns has brought before the board concerning the board's position for doing things for others and not doing for
Excuse me. Which agenda item are you going to
Five.
speak about? Number
same what
five.
he just, yes, that's what I was referencing.
Okay.
And with Ms. Fasola. And I mean, this is not something that is new to the board, and if you're gonna do for one, I think the board needs to do for all. And in this case, the board has failed to uphold its duty of being fair and impartial to all that come before. If you're gonna assist one, you're gonna have to assist everyone. And I think that's something that the board has failed to do. And then even after the evidence, as Mr. Burns stated, that is within the file, that the board did not advise Mr. Fasola as it did in assisting Mr. Thompson. And I thought that was somewhat unfair on the board's part. Now let me just say this, because this is not something that you all have not been aware of, and I think the board needs to be more considerate in assisting all and not some. Now, there's no way the board should have walked one through and not the other. I think the board has a protection responsibility of assisting where they can and where they need. And I think Ms. Jacobs made mention of that. In Ms. Fasola's case, the board did nothing to assist her, but in Mr. Thompson's case, the board went as far as to walking him through and carrying out the proceedings for him even after the case had been closed. So I asked the board, is that the way we operate, or is that the way we should operate in the state of Louisiana for the citizens of Louisiana? Should the board look at one any different than they look at the other? Because that's apparently what is happening in this case, that the board took a closed case of a man who was deceased, reopened it, and awarded $3,500 or so to someone who, quote unquote, did not possibly have anything in the auction, whereas this young lady did have things in her auction and had to file a claim that was found guilty, and the board did nothing. Now I'm asking, is the board acting fairly and impartial when assisting one and not the other? Because I think that's something that we have to address. You don't want to do
You have
for
2
one.
minutes.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. I was looking for you to tell me how much time I had. We don't want to do for one and not do for the other. And that's my question to the board, and I think that the board should give some explanation as to how they can do for one and not for the other. Whereas blatantly one was in violation and the other one, according to the records, had no violations, was no finding, the case was closed, but yet reopened. The preferential treatment given to some and not to all. That's the question that I'm asking, because, I mean, apparently something must be wrong with the proceedings or the procedures that the board is using to issue who they help and who they won't. Because I think this lady has a legitimate argument, and when we have our professional people who said there was no findings, and then come back and reopen a case and still produce no findings, but yet awards $3,500 on the bond of the man who's dead. Thank you very much. Then I think we need to really reconsider those options. And I'm here to say that this is not the way the board should operate, if this is operated that way. And if you make a mistake and you don't correct it, that's 2 mistakes. All the thing the board has to do now is correct the mistake that they've made. Thank you for your time.